Alright guys, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about the two main airplanes that were kind of the false alarm of 9/11. They were assumed to be hijacked and they both had to make emergency landings. However, after investigation, neither of them had any suspicious individuals on board. Obviously, September 11th, very chaotic day. Some things got confusing when it came to communication with the cockpits of these flights, and we're going to go through both of them. The first one being Delta Airlines Flight 1989, which was a regularly scheduled flight offering nonstop morning service on September 11th, 2001, from Boston Logan International Airport to Los Angeles International Airport on a Boeing 767 aircraft. The flight was one of several that was possibly considered hijacked. However, it did end up landing safely at Cleveland Hopkins International Airport. When it comes to the details of the suspected hijacking, the two aircraft that departed Logan International Airport in Boston on September 11th, 2001, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, were hijacked by terrorists as part of the 9/11 attacks. After the hijacked planes struck the World Trade Center, Boston Center air traffic controllers realized that both aircrafts were Boeing 767s departing Logan Airport for Los Angeles. Delta 1989 fit the same profile as the other hijacked flights. It also had departed Logan Airport for LA and was also the same aircraft model. The Boston Center staff notified the FAA about their suspicions at 9:19 a.m. Eastern Standard Time when the FAA's New England Regional Office contacted the Herndon Command Center and asked Herndon to relay a request that Cleveland Center notify Delta 1989 to increase their cockpit security. They then ordered controllers to send a cockpit warning to the Delta flight. Boston was tracking the Delta flight and not receiving any radio contact from the aircraft. Now, at the time, the Delta 1989 was in Cleveland airspace and was in contact with the Cleveland Air Traffic Control Center, the Delta flight to be in Cleveland airspace, and ordered the Cleveland Center to watch the flight as a suspected hijacking. A Cleveland controller thought he heard, quote, "Get out of here," and quote, "We have a bomb on board," from the Delta flight. The Delta pilot, however, denied any cockpit intrusion and stated that everyone on board was fine. It was later confirmed that the transmission had come from United Airlines Flight 93, which was in the same vicinity as the Delta flight, and would later crash into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, after the passengers and crew revolted against the hijackers. The Northeast Air Defense Sector became aware of the Delta flight right after the crash of American Airlines Flight 77 into the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m. when Boston Center called them at 9:41 and told NORAD of the suspicions regarding the Delta flight. At 9:42 a.m., the FAA ordered all aircraft in flight to land to the nearest airport. They then dispatched a fighter aircraft from Ohio and Michigan to intercept the flight. Though Delta 1989 never turned off its transponder, and they tracked it until its eventual landing in Cleveland, Ohio. Now, as for the flight and the landing itself, after the pilots reported an unruly Middle Eastern passenger, and due to confusion and lack of communication between Boston and Cleveland, Delta ordered Flight 1989 to land at Cleveland. The flight reversed course over Toledo, Ohio, and landed uneventfully in Cleveland at 9:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, some 6 minutes after the Boston Center had called NORAD and told them about Delta 1989. The FBI and city SWAT team evacuated the airport and held the aircraft at gunpoint on the tarmac for 2 hours, though all passengers were cleared. After an investigation by local and FBI authorities, it was concluded that there was no threat aboard the Delta flight, as noted by the 9/11 Commission report. Quote, "During the course of the morning, there were multiple erroneous reports of hijacked aircraft," and that is the story of the Delta flight and the confusion that they had going on there in terms of thinking they heard something come from the cockpit of the Delta 1989 when it was really one of the actual hijacked airplanes. Now, this is just an easy timeline to follow on how this all happened and how quickly it came about. At around 8:05, you can see the Delta flight departed Boston Logan International Airport and was bound for LA. And the problems arise just a little bit an hour later, around an hour 14 minutes later, is when the call comes in after the two aircraft strike the World Trade Center. They see a very comparable, similar model in terms of where the flight is coming from. Boston, where is it going? LA, the aircraft model. They get concerned. They hear something in the cockpit. At least they thought they heard something. They heard reports of an unruly Middle Eastern passenger. And that's kind of the idea behind this flight getting virtually grounded. Every other flight got grounded as well, but this flight was held up for 2 hours on the tarmac and ended up landing about an hour and a half after it took off in Cleveland, Ohio. And that brings us to the second suspected possible hijacked flight that turned out to be a false alarm. It was a Korean flight 085. This was an aircraft originally made in South Korea and was en route to Ted Stevens International Airport in Anchorage, Alaska, when information about the 9/11 attacks was relayed to the crew. The pilot in command's ACARS message replied, including letters HJK, a prompt interpreted as a distress signal indicating that the flight had been hijacked. The flight was then ordered to divert to Whitehorse International Airport in Canada's Yunkin territory. U.S. officials and the Canadian Prime Minister authorized the aircraft to be shot down if it did not cooperate. The airliner pilots complied with the 747 landing safely in Whitehorse, Canada, with U.S. F-15 military jets escorting it. The suspected hijacking turned out to be a false alarm. And here is just some details into the incident. After the 9/11 attacks, a call went out for all international planes to return to their airports of origin, or if they did not have enough fuel to land in Canadian territory. While discussing the day's events with the Korean Air Office, the pilot of Flight 085 included the letters HJK, the code for hijacked, in an airline message. When the pilot sent his message, the text messaging service company noticed the HJK code, and the officials worry that the South Korean pilots might be sending a coded message for help, and they notified NORAD. NORAD then scrambled F-15 jets to intercept the 747, with Alaska Air Traffic Control asking the pilots coded questions. ACT instructed the flight to change its transponder code to 7500, the universal signal for hijack, expecting that if they had not been hijacked, the pilots would respond to that same effect. Instead, they simply complied with the instructions, which ACT took as confirmation that the flight had been indeed hijacked. Worried that a possible hijacked plane might strike a target in Alaska, the governor ordered the evacuation of large hotels and government buildings in Anchorage. At nearby Valdez, Alaska, the U.S. security guard ordered all tankers filling up with oil to head out to sea, and the general who was in charge of NORAD planes that scrambled to shadow the Korean flight told reporters in 2001 that he was prepared to order the South Korean airplane to be shot down before it could attack a target in Alaska, with NORAD telling Anchorage Air Route Traffic Control Center that it would shoot down the airliner if it came near any potential targets. These controllers informed Flight 085 to avoid all population centers and head out of the United States to Whitehorse, Yunkin, Canada. NORAD promptly called all Canadian authorities seeking the go-ahead to shoot the plane down over Canada, and this is what he said. He said, "Yes, if you think there are terrorists, you can call me again, but be ready to shoot them down." So as the 9/11 morning developed, and really as the second plane hit the South Tower, you started to see people be very aggressive when it came to potentially shooting down aircraft, as they believed, it was hijacked. 90 minutes after the South Korean pilots changed their transponder signal to the hijacked code, the plane landed safely in Whitehorse. Canadian officials evacuated all schools and large buildings before the plane landed. On the tarmac, the flight was met by armed Royal Canadian police officers who, after interrogating the pilots, learned the whole ordeal was caused by a translation error. The South Korean pilot stated that he had been ordered by air traffic control to change the transponder signal, and air traffic control confirmed having done so. A second Korean Air 747, a cargo plane, was also diverted to Whitehorse that day. And you can see the timeline of events for this aircraft originally taking off in South Korea and eventually landing at around 2:54 after the long ordeal, and the jets get scrambled at around 1 o'clock following it. They end up landing the plane at Whitehorse International Airport. So that is the story of the two potential 9/11 aircrafts that were thought to be hijacked, but it turned out to be a false alarm. One seemed to be a language barrier error where they were asking the pilot to potentially change his code to a hijack code, and the pilot didn't know that that's what it meant, and they thought, and he was using coded language to say that the flight had been hijacked. And the other one was simply not hearing the correct cockpit. They thought that the message from the hijackers was coming from the Delta Airlines flight when it was coming from one of the planes that actually did fly into the World Trade Center. So guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.